A boot came down hard on a woman's leg. Bone cracked. She screamed and folded onto the kitchen floor, both hands clawing at the tile. Above her, a man just stood there, breathing slow, like he had nowhere else to be. She dragged herself toward the counter where her phone had landed. Every inch of the crawl burned. Her fingers found the screen. She typed 3 words with a shaking hand. "He broke my leg." She hit send before she could even read the name at the top. The message didn't go to 911. It didn't go to her sister. It went to a stranger who had been getting her texts for months. His name was Cormac Vance, and he had spent 20 years learning exactly what to do with a message like that. Why was her number already saved inside his phone? Just stay with me on this one. Let me back up and tell you who this woman was, because you need to understand her before you understand what happened next. Her name was Delia Marsh, 26 years old. She waited tables at a diner off Hampton Boulevard in Norfolk, Virginia, the kind of place that never really closes, where the coffee is always burnt and the tips are always thin. She worked doubles. She smiled at truckers and lonely old men, and she remembered how everybody took their eggs. People liked her. That was the thing nobody could figure out later. Everybody who met Delia liked her, and every single one of them had no idea what she went home to. The man in that kitchen was named Dwight Kessler. He drove a tow truck. He had a laugh that filled a room and a hand that could empty it. When Delia met him 2 years back, he brought her flowers and paid her rent and told her she was the only good thing that ever happened to him. Believe me, that's how it always starts. Not with a fist, with flowers. The first time he grabbed her, he cried afterward, said he'd never do it again. Said the words 100 times, and she believed him 100 times, because the alternative was admitting she'd built her whole life on a man who scared her. So she stayed. She wore long sleeves in July. She told her sister Renata she was clumsy. She learned the map of the house, which rooms had doors that locked and which ones didn't, the way a soldier learns terrain. And here's the part that matters. Delia was not stupid. She was not weak. She was surviving, and survival looks a lot like patience from the outside. For 6 months she'd been keeping a record. A cheap blue spiral notebook, hidden inside a cutout square in the pages of an old cookbook on the top shelf. In it she wrote every date, every bruise, every threat. She wrote it in small, careful handwriting because part of her already knew that someday she would need proof, and part of her already knew Dwight would never let her walk out that door alive. Now let's talk about the phone. Dwight controlled everything: the bank card, the car keys, and the phone. He checked her messages every night, scrolling with his thumb while she held her breath. So Delia did something clever and desperate. Months earlier, she'd bought a second phone, a cheap prepaid thing, and she kept it taped under the bathroom sink. On it, she saved exactly one number she thought belonged to a domestic violence hotline she'd found on a flyer. Except she'd written the digits down wrong. One number off. She never knew that. All those nights she typed things into that phone, things she couldn't say out loud. They didn't go to a hotline at all. They went to Cormac Vance. Cormac was 51 years old, and he lived alone in a farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city, out where the roads turn to gravel and the streetlights give up. 20 years in the Navy. Most of it with the SEAL teams, the part he didn't talk about, the part that left him waking up at 3 in the morning with his hands already clenched. He'd retired 4 years back, and then 2 years back, he'd lost the only thing that made retirement bearable. His daughter Ellie was 9 when the fever took her. It came on a Tuesday, and by Sunday she was gone. Just like that. A man who had survived things that would break most people could not survive one small hospital room. His marriage ended inside a year. He sold the house they'd shared because he couldn't walk past her bedroom door. He bought the farmhouse. He bought a cheap second-hand phone from a pawn shop because he'd thrown his old one into a river, number and all, wanting nothing that could ring with a voice he used to know. And then the texts started coming. The first one arrived on a night Cormac would never forget, because it was the 2-year anniversary of the day Ellie died. He was sitting in the dark with a bottle he hadn't opened yet, deciding some things a man shouldn't decide alone, when the phone lit up on the table. A message from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words, "Are you still there?" He stared at it. He almost didn't answer. Then his thumb moved on its own and he typed back, "I'm here." A long pause. Then, "Thank you." Nothing else. Wrong number, obviously. Some stranger reaching for someone else in the dark. But here is the thing Cormac never told a living soul. That stranger's 4 words pulled him back from the edge of the worst decision of his life. So he saved the number. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face. He saved it under the only name that felt right. He saved it as Ellie. And over the next few months, more messages came from that number, always by accident, always meant for someone else. Little things. Once a grocery list. Once "Happy birthday, Mom," sent to him by mistake at midnight. Cormac never wrote back again. But every time that phone lit up, it meant a stranger out there was still alive, still breathing, still sending words into the dark. And somehow that kept him breathing too. He didn't understand it. He just knew he checked that phone every single day, the way some men check on a grave. So by the end of chapter 1 of this story, you've got a broken woman in a kitchen and a broken man in a farmhouse, connected by a wrong number neither of them chose, and a leg that just snapped under a boot. That's where the danger really begins. The message came in at 9:47 on a Thursday night. Cormac was in the barn oiling a hinge when he heard the buzz through his jacket. He almost ignored it. He almost let it wait. Something made him pull it out. And there it was, that same number, the one saved as Ellie, 3 words on the screen that made the wrench slip out of his hand and clang against the concrete. "He broke my leg." Cormac stood there for a second and the whole world got very quiet. All those months of grocery lists and birthday texts, and now this. He typed fast. "Where are you?" "Nothing." "Are you safe?" "Nothing." "Call 911 right now." Nothing came back but the little gray line that tells you a message was delivered and never read. Because Delia on the kitchen floor had just had the phone kicked out of her hand. Now most people in Cormac's position would have called the police and left it there. Done their duty. Gone back to the hinge. But Cormac Vance was not most people, and that number was not just a number to him anymore. For 2 years it had been the closest thing he had to a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Something in him that had been asleep for a long time stood straight up. He made one phone call. A man named Danny Reyes, an old friend who'd done 2 tours before trading his rifle for a badge, now a detective with the Norfolk PD. Cormac read him the number. He said, "I need an address and I need it in the next 5 minutes and I need you to trust me." Reyes knew that voice. He'd heard it in places without names. He didn't argue. He said, "Give me 2." While he waited, Cormac walked to the truck and opened the passenger door and whistled once, low. And out of the barn came the last member of his team. A German Shepherd, gone gray around the muzzle, one ear notched from a night nobody talked about. Ranger. 8 years old, retired from the same work Cormac was retired from. The 2 of them the only survivors of a unit that had gone into a valley with 12 and come out with 2. Ranger climbed into the seat like he'd been waiting his whole life for the word. Maybe he had. The phone buzzed. Reyes, an address on the east side, a rental off Ballantyne, and a warning. Cormac, that name's got priors. Assault. He did 18 months. "I'm sending a unit but we're stacked tonight, could be 20 minutes. Cormac was already turning the key. He said, "Don't wait on me, just get them rolling," and he hung up before Reyes could tell him to stay home. The storm hit as he pulled onto the highway. Not a metaphor storm, a real one. Rain coming sideways, wind shoving the truck across the lane, the wipers losing the fight. 40 minutes of road folded down to 25 because Cormac drove like the miles were personal. Ranger sat perfectly still the whole way, staring out the windshield, ears up. That dog could feel it. They both could. Something bad was happening at the other end of this drive, and they were the only two coming. Let me tell you what was happening at the other end. Delia had made it to the hallway. Dragging a broken leg across the floor is a thing I hope you never have to imagine, but she did it, one elbow at a time, leaving a smear behind her because the phone was gone and the front door was 30 feet away, and 30 feet was the whole rest of her life. Dwight had gone quiet, which was worse than the yelling. He'd walked into the kitchen and she could hear the freezer open, ice hitting a glass. He was making himself a drink, like nothing had happened. Like she wasn't bleeding on the floor of the home they shared. She got a hand on the doorknob. It was locked, and the deadbolt was up high, up where she'd have to stand, and she couldn't stand. She reached anyway. Her fingertips brushed the bolt. And that's when his hand closed around her ankle, the broken one, and the sound that came out of her wasn't even a scream anymore. It was something lower, something an animal makes. He dragged her back down the hall. He was talking now, low and calm Dwight was the one she was truly afraid of. He said, "You were gonna leave. After everything." He said, "You know I can't let you do that." And Delia, looking up at the man she'd once brought flowers home for, understood with total clarity that tonight was the night he'd been building toward for 2 years. She stopped fighting, not because she gave up, because she was saving what little she had left for one last chance, whatever it turned out to be. Dwight left her in the living room and went back for his drink, confident, unhurried, a man who owned the room and everyone in it. And out in the storm, a truck's headlights swung onto Ballantyne Street. For one strange moment, everything went still. The rain seemed to ease. Dwight sat down in his chair with his whiskey. Delia lay quiet on the floor, catching her breath. The house was calm. It looked for just a moment like the worst was over. It wasn't. It was about to change into something else entirely. The truck door slammed. Delia heard it through the wall, a heavy sound the storm couldn't swallow, and she felt Dwight go rigid across the room. He set his glass down slow. Nobody was supposed to be coming. Nobody ever came. He crossed to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch, and in the flash of a passing car, he saw a big man walking straight up the middle of the yard through the downpour, not hurrying, not slowing, a dog moving at his knee like a shadow with teeth. Now here's where the whole story turns, so listen close. Dwight did what men like Dwight always do when the fear finally lands on their side of the room. He reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a handgun. A cheap 9mm he'd bought off a guy at the shop. He racked it. And just like that, this stopped being one man's rage against a woman who couldn't run. It became something with a gun in it, in a locked house, with a broken woman on the floor and a stranger walking up the steps who had no idea what was waiting behind the door. The nature of the whole thing changed. It wasn't about Dwight's pride anymore. It was about whether anybody in that house was going to live through the next 5 minutes. Cormac reached the porch. He didn't knock like a neighbor. He put the side of his fist against the door twice, hard, and he called out in a voice that carried. He said, "I'm not police. I got a message from this house. I'm here for whoever sent it. Open the door." Inside, Dwight pressed his back to the wall beside the frame, gun up, and shouted, "Wrong house, get off my property." And from the floor, with everything she had left, Delia screamed. One word, help. That word did 2 things. It told Cormac exactly where she was, and it told him she was still alive. It also told Dwight that his hostage had just given him away, and Cormac heard the change in the man's breathing through an inch of cheap wood, heard the small metallic sound of a thumb on a hammer, and dropped flat to the porch boards half a second before the gun went off. The bullet punched a hole through the door where his chest had been. Ranger didn't flinch at the shot. That dog had heard 1,000 shots. He'd pressed himself against the house on Cormac's hand signal, out of the line of the door, ears flat, waiting. Cormac low-crawled off the porch and around the side of the house in the dark and the rain, and I want you to understand something. This was the same thing he'd done in valleys with no names in the worst nights of his life, the muscle memory that never left him. The training that had cost him so much was, for the first time in years, exactly the thing somebody needed. He found a window, kitchen, the one Delia had smeared with her own hand an hour before. It was cracked open 2 inches for the heat of the stove. Cormac got his fingers under it and lifted it slow and silent, and he lifted Ranger up and in first, one arm under the dog's chest, and gave a single soft command in a language of clicks and low words that the two of them had built over years together. Find her. Guard, not the man. Her. Ranger went through that window like water and disappeared into the dark house. And now let me pause for one breath, because you've come this far with me and you deserve to know that this is the moment it all started to turn. If you're still here, if this story's got its hand around your heart the way it's got mine, do me one small thing. Hit that subscribe button, that's all. It tells me you want the rest of these, the real ones, the ones about people who almost didn't make it. All right, back into the house because Ranger's already moving and Dwight doesn't know it yet. Delia felt the dog before she saw him. A warm shape pressing against her side in the dark, a wet nose against her cheek, and then the big body settling between her and the room, facing out. A low sound coming from deep in its chest that she felt more than heard. She didn't understand. She thought she was dreaming. She got one arm over the dog's back and held on, and Ranger let her, and did not move, because a man he trusted had told him this was the one to protect. Dwight heard the growl and spun toward it, gun swinging, and Cormac's voice came from a completely different part of the house, from the back hallway now, calm and even and everywhere at once. He said, "That dog will not leave her. You point that thing at her and he's on your throat before you finish the thought." Dwight fired at the sound of the voice. Drywall exploded. Cormac was already gone, moving again, and Dwight was down to a gun with fewer rounds in it and a house that had turned against him in the dark. 2 developments and the stakes climbed with both. That's how the middle of a nightmare works. It doesn't hold steady. It gets worse and then worse again. Dwight backed into the corner where he could see both the front door and the shape of the dog on the floor. He was smart enough, even scared, to know he still held the only card that mattered. He leveled the gun at Delia and Ranger both, and he called out into the dark house. He said, "I don't know who you are, but here's how this goes. You come out where I can see you, hands empty, or I put one in the girl. You got 3 seconds." And he meant it. Everybody in that house knew he meant it. This was the edge of everything. Cormac stepped out of the hallway into the doorway of the living room with his hands open at his sides. He was bigger up close than Dwight had guessed from the window. Soaked through, rain running off him, gray in his beard and something in his eyes that made Dwight's finger tighten on the trigger without meaning to. Cormac looked at Delia on the floor, at her wrong-angled leg and the dog guarding her, and for just a second his face did something. Then it went flat again. He looked at Dwight and he said, in the calmest voice you ever heard, "You already made your worst mistake tonight. You just don't know which one it was yet." Dwight said, "Shut up." He said, "On your knees." Cormac got down on his knees, slow, hands still open, right in the middle of the room. "And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking he gave up. He didn't. He was doing the one thing 20 years had taught him. He was buying 3 feet. Because from the floor on his knees, Cormac Vance was now exactly at the level of Dwight's gun hand, and he was 6 feet away, and he knew something Dwight didn't. He knew that a man pointing a gun at 2 targets has to choose one, and the half second it takes to choose is the only door that ever opens in a room like this. So Cormac said the one thing designed to make the choice for him. He looked past Dwight straight at Delia and he said her name, not a nickname, her real name. He said, "Delia, close your eyes." Dwight's head turned toward her, just an inch, just for a heartbeat. How does this stranger know her name? That inch, that heartbeat, was the door. Cormac came up off the floor. "I have told you he was 51 and gray, and all of that was true, and none of it mattered, because the thing that crossed those 6 feet was not a tired man from a farmhouse. It was everything he used to be. He came in low and hard, and his shoulder took Dwight in the gut and drove him into the wall, and his left hand was already clamped over the gun, over the whole slide of it, so that when Dwight pulled the trigger in a panic, the weapon couldn't cycle. One shot into the ceiling and then nothing, because a semi-automatic can't fire when a hand is crushing it out of battery. Little detail. Cost of the whole fight. And then Ranger came off the floor too. The dog had held his post through the shots, through the shouting, because he'd been told to guard the girl, not attack the man. But the second Cormac's hands were on Dwight, the equation changed, and 8 years of training and one growled word turned that gray shepherd into the thing Cormac had promised. He hit Dwight's gun arm at the wrist and clamped down and drove his whole weight backward, and the gun came loose and skittered under the couch, and Dwight was screaming now, a different kind of scream than the ones this house was used to hearing. Cormac didn't hit him more than he had to. That's the truth of it, and it's important. A lesser man, an angrier man, would have taken that whole 2 years of Delia's out of Dwight's face right there on the floor. Cormac put him down, put a knee in his back, called Ranger off with one word the instant the fight was over, and pinned Dwight's wrists behind him with a zip tie he'd carried in his jacket pocket for reasons that had nothing to do with tonight and everything to do with the man he'd always been. Then he leaned down close to Dwight's ear, and he said the only cruel thing he said all night. He said, "She sent for help for 2 years and it landed on me by accident. Think about how unlucky you are." And then he turned his back on Dwight completely, which is its own kind of message, and he crawled across the floor to Delia. She was shaking. Shock, blood loss, the leg, all of it. Ranger had already come back to her side and pressed in close, and Cormac put his big hand on the side of her face, careful, like she might break, and he said, "I've got you. You're done. It's over." And Delia looked up at this enormous soaking stranger she had never seen in her life, and she asked the only question that made any sense to her. She whispered, "Who are you?" And Cormac Vance, who had been alone in a farmhouse for 2 years with a phone that lit up now and then and kept him alive, opened his mouth to answer and found that he couldn't, because he didn't have a clean answer. Not yet. In the distance, finally, sirens. The sirens got loud and then they were everywhere, red and blue washing across the wet walls. Reyes came through the door first with his weapon up and stopped cold at the sight of it. A zip-tied man face down and screaming about a dog. A gray shepherd sitting calm as a church. A woman on the floor with a shattered leg. And Cormac Vance kneeling beside her with her hand in both of his, looking up at his old friend with an expression Reyes had not seen on that face in 20 years of knowing him. Reyes lowered the gun. He said, "Cormac, what did you do?" And Cormac said 4 words. "I answered the phone." They took Delia out on a stretcher. Cormac walked beside it all the way to the ambulance in the rain, and Ranger walked on the other side. And when the paramedics tried to load her and Delia's hand tightened on Cormac's sleeve in panic, they let him climb in and ride along. Dwight went out the other door in cuffs, and I'll tell you right now so you don't have to wonder. He was charged that night. Attempted murder. Aggravated assault. And when the detectives climbed to the top shelf of that kitchen and found the old cookbook with the square cut out of its pages, and inside it the cheap blue spiral notebook, 6 months of dates and bruises and threats in small, careful handwriting, the case stopped being a she said and became a mountain. Dwight Kessler is not getting out for a very long time. Delia's own patience, all those nights she thought she was just surviving, turned out to be the thing that put him away. Her leg took 3 surgeries and most of a year. Cormac came to everyone. He didn't make a big thing of it. He'd just be in the waiting room when she woke up, this quiet mountain of a man with a bad knee, Ranger asleep at his feet because the hospital staff had given up pretending they'd make the dog leave. And somewhere in that year, in a slow, careful way, Delia finally got her answer to the question she'd asked on the floor. Cormac told her about Ellie. He'd never told anybody. He told her about the anniversary and the bottle and the 4 words that came through on the worst night of his life. "Are you still there?" He told her he'd typed "I'm here" to a stranger, and it had been the only thing standing between him and the end of everything. He told her he'd saved her number under his daughter's name because he didn't know hers, and because those accidental texts, her grocery lists, her midnight birthday wish to her mother, had been the small proof he'd needed month after month that somebody out there was still alive and reaching out into the dark. And if she could keep doing it, so could he. Delia cried when he told her. Not because it was sad, though it was. Because for 2 years she'd believed every message she'd sent had gone nowhere, screamed into a void, unheard. And it turned out every one of them had landed somewhere. It had landed on a broken man in a farmhouse, and it had kept him breathing. And then on the one night it truly mattered, it had brought him through a storm and a locked door and a gun to pull her off that floor. She'd thought she was completely alone the whole time. She never had been. That's the part that got her. Here's the thing about a wrong number. We spend our lives thinking the important things arrive by design, addressed to us, right on time. And sometimes the thing that saves your life is a message meant for somebody else, typed by a shaking hand, off by a single digit, landing in the one place in the whole world where somebody was quietly waiting to be needed again. Delia doesn't wait tables anymore. She works at a shelter now, the real kind, with a real hotline, and she's the one who answers when a phone lights up at 3 in the morning with somebody reaching into the dark. She knows exactly what that reach feels like from the other side. She always answers. She never lets it go to the void. Cormac is not alone in that farmhouse anymore either. He's not going to tell you it's a love story, and I'm not going to tell you that either, because it's bigger and quieter than that. It's 2 people who were each drowning in their own house on opposite ends of a wrong number, who turned out to be the exact thing the other one needed to keep standing. He fixed up the spare room. She and Ranger have a routine now, the old dog following her slow around the yard while her leg gets stronger, matching her pace like he did the night of the stretcher. And Ranger, that gray old dog who held his post through gunfire because a man he trusted told him to guard the girl. He sleeps at the foot of Delia's bed most nights, and he lifts his head at every small sound, and he goes back down only when he's sure. Some things you carry for the whole rest of your life. Some of them are wounds. And some of them, if you're very lucky, are the ones you'd walk through a storm to protect. Remember how this started. A boot came down and a bone cracked, and a woman crawled across a floor she thought she was going to die on. She typed 3 words to a number she got wrong, and it turned out to be the most right thing she ever did. That's where the meaning was hiding the whole time, not in the flowers at the beginning, in the wrong number at the end. She thought nobody was listening. Somebody always was.